We want now to have a conversation about, the state of the nation and what the country needs. Dismas Mokua is a political risk analyst. He is our guest this morning. Good morning, Dismas.
Good morning. Asante sana. While I was waiting, I've committed to memory a few of Kissy proverbs.
Okay.
That I wanted to share. Because last time I saw one of my friends came with a Somali proverb. Yeah, so I've got one I'd like to share. But after I compose myself, because right now...
What's wrong?
Man. When you're in this kind of august setting with the very heavy intellectuals, you have to take a bit of time to regain your composure.
To dumb yourself down.
City has a thermos of libation.
And you see he's got a notebook with a red pen.
Yeah, and he has a green pen as well. You know what
that's... And a blue one.
And a black one, just in case. Yes.
And if you steal those ones, he has 7 more.
Oh, okay.
True.
Yeah. City, why don't you welcome Dismas with the day's proverb? He has a Kissy proverb, but let's start with a Congolese proverb.
Yes, proverbs for the whole of this week from the country of DRC. What is said over the dead lion's body cannot be said when he is alive.
What is said over a dead lion's body cannot be said when that lion is alive.
No.
Let's start with that one, Dismas. What's your interpretation of it?
I guess, from a Kissy perspective, I guess it means that when you've got a powerful person in the room, you can't afford to look at them in the eye and call a spade a spade. You have to wait for them to go to the next room. Then, in low tones, you whisper that this guy is full of something.
You cannot tell it to them.
No, you can't.
You
will suffer.
They claw your eyes out.
Yeah, there's pain. And I guess that exists in the political space in Kenya.
So what were the Congolese saying? Were they encouraging that to continue? Is it basically reminding you that be mindful of where you are before you say what you want to say?
I guess they're reminding you of the power of the tongue, that if you're going to say something, be prepared for the consequences.
Be ready.
Yeah, if you step on somebody's toe, then be ready for the outcome.
Okay. The Kissy proverb?
No, I was actually kidding. I don't speak Kissy.
No, you made us sit with anticipation, knowing you have to remove it.
No, there's I'm going to say it in an elaborate manner. It says, yeah, in the Kissy setup, when a man is of age that is about to get married, everybody in the village will be saying what kind of lady is he going to get, and then people start making plans. So women were told, don't start making plans, because in the past, when ladies get married, they would assist in maybe farming activities. So the lady would say, I've got 5 sons, so when all of them get married, I'm going to get 5 assistants. And then she starts allocating duties. But she may be shocked. They may not get married. So, in other words, plan to spend what you have. Yes.
Meaning live within your
plan
means.
with what you have.
Yeah, live within your means.
Voilà.
And I suspect it's related to today's conversation.
Okay. There's an article that was published a couple of days ago. I understand that Kenya needs a president who will create economic and political stability. And this was by you yourself, Dismas Mokua. Let me just read the intro and the second paragraph. Article 238 of the Constitution. Does our Constitution have this article? Can you just confirm?
It's not a voodoo article. I'm not a lawyer, but I know a lot of law.
You know this one? Article 238 of the Constitution says, national security is the protection against internal and external threats to Kenya's territorial integrity and sovereignty, its people, their rights, freedoms, property, peace, stability, and prosperity, and other national interests. The article further states that national security of Kenya shall be promoted and guaranteed in a manner consistent and subject to the Constitution. That national security must be pursued in compliance with the law and with the utmost respect for the rule of law, democracy, human rights, and fundamental freedoms. Then you've gone on into another one, Article 1, talks about the sovereignty. The Constitution provides for the building blocks of a stable nation. 3 things must exist for any state to enjoy stability and prosperity: a stable defense and security that is subject to the Constitution, a stable political climate, and a stable economy. These 3 components form the triad of stability and prosperity. Kenya has a stable defense and security infrastructure consistent with the Constitution, which is why, as we look at this year's presidential election, Kenyans must delegate sovereign power to a leader who will guarantee and secure political and economic stability. Failure to do so means Kenyans will wallow in the miasma of impunity, mediocrity, and corruption. Either or will not work. Political and economic management skills must be the bare minimum. This was actually not last week, it was last year, right?
At the beginning of the year.
As we're looking into going into an election later in the year. And you're saying, Kenyans, as you go into the ballot, we must look at somebody who will be able to balance
Those 3.
You said the triad, and then you focused on those 2, because you said, as far as you were concerned, security-wise, we're sorted. Now here we are. We went to the ballot. We elected. We have a president in office. Okay, and what did we get? Did we get one who understands those 3, in your opinion?
Yeah, that article is about 1.5 years old, and in my view, it's very relevant. But first of all, before even we go to the article, let's ask ourselves, what gives a state power? Where does a state derive power from? And I've had the opportunity of sitting on the feet of powerful people, very intelligent, retired generals and diplomats. And they always indicate that a country's power stems from, number 1, diplomacy. So the quality of diplomats you have and the kind of policies you have. Then the economy, whether it's weak or strong. And then, of course, the military. So those 3 are very important. And I don't know how these things, they always come in 3s. So that's a triad. And then when you come now to the what makes a nation stable, the first one is that defense, which captures security, like the police force, the intelligence, but all of them are grouped under the military. And for Kenya, we're in a very good space because we've got a very disciplined military. And if you interact with those generals, you actually get very impressed. They even have a magazine called KDF Journal. The kind of cadets they take to the Kenya Military Academy in Lanet is just shocking. They even have a fully-fledged university, the National Defense University. I think probably it's the only one in Africa. Then they've got a college in Karen called the National Defense College, where they teach top military people who've been identified for leadership and the public of servants who've been identified for leadership on the grand strategy. That is where Kenya is today and where it's supposed to go. So for that one, we are the envy in the region. Then secondly, we have another issue of political stability. And for Kenya, we've been in a very unfortunate space that 1 year to the election, there's a bit of turbulence. And then 1 year after the election, there's still a bit of turbulence. And then for the economic aspect, and maybe now when you talk about economic stability, really what exactly is one talking about? In my view, you're supposed to maintain low inflation, and which is very stable, and then low unemployment rates, and then massive exports. And when you're talking about those 3 variables, obviously, and low interest rates, when you're talking about those 3 variables, then you begin to ask yourself that when Kenyans took a decision to elect a president and his deputy and all these leaders, did they take into active consideration those 3 things? And majority of Kenyans know all this, but maybe they've not been able to join the dots. And in my view, the Kenya Kwanza administration has been hitting the high notes. And when you talk about economic stability, the major issues really is around food inflation and the cost of fuel. Because when you speak to majority of Kenyans, what 1,000 bob used to buy maybe when Kibaki was leaving office and what he will give you today, the worlds apart. I remember I would go to a supermarket when Kibaki was office with 5,000, and the kind of purchases you had, you'd actually struggle to carry them. But today, with 1,000 bob, you can. I doubt whether you can actually buy milk, bread, and anything else. So things are really become thick. However, noting what the Kenya Kwanza administration has been doing, one sees that there are proactive signs for them to ensure that there is economic stability, and they're focusing on policy issues. Like, for instance, recently, Musalia Mudavadi, the Prime Cabinet Secretary, had a meeting with all the principal secretaries, the principal secretaries committee, where they laid down very elaborate strategic national priorities and agenda on what they intend to do. And one of them is food security, because that's where the rubber meets the road. And they've offered subsidies to fertilizers. Then they're talking about housing security as well. They'd like everybody to own a house. In fact, there's a lot of literature that the moment you own a house, a decent house, and you've got a title deed, all of a sudden, your confidence levels go to the sky. You start working with a spring like Okonko in Nigeria, things fall apart. That you're full of confidence. Then number two, the moment you're able to have 3 meals a day, you are not worried about basic issues, because part of the reason why human beings suffer, when you wake up in the morning, the first thing you fear is establishing eye connection with your landlord or landlady, if you have not met your rent obligation. So that disrupts your entire day. And then secondly, is asking yourself, where am I going to get my next meal? So you really become disturbed. That is why people in the Nordic countries are said to be the happiest people in the world, because they've gone through these basic issues. So for them, instead, they're worried as to whether or not they've got enough reserves as a national security interest. Because again, those are Nordic countries, and known to many people in the world, they've got reserves, food reserves, which can last them for 10 years in case of a crisis. In those beautiful mountains, those Alps, underground is food reserves. Now, when African countries mismanage their affairs, that is the food which comes to African countries after 10 years as a donation. I'm not sure whether there's any African country.
Is that a fact?
The statement of facts.
And there's evidence to support what you've just said?
Yeah, there is.
Okay. Go on.
Yeah, most of the countries that have aligned their national and public interest in a very structured manner, they've got reserves which can go for many years. So in case of anything, they don't get into a bit of trouble. So in my view, what we really must encourage our leaders in the context of what is going to happen later on today. You said right now there are no signs of mandamano. It's actually taken me 11 minutes to get here, and normally I would take 1 hour. So when I asked my cab driver, how come you have the guts to come out? Then he told me he's got 2 choices. He can sit home and look at his wife and children and have black tea the entire day, or go out and make some money so that he can go back with some resources. Okay. And he says on average he makes 6,000 shillings a day.
Makes sense after he's done everything else.
Yeah,
right?
that is his, he owns the cab, so he makes a net of 6,000. So he said if you go on with these 2 mandamanos, he'll be losing 2,000 shillings per day. Sorry, 12,000 shillings per day.
For 2 days.
Yeah.
So you're alluding to that if the government, if the president is going to create a situation of economic and political stability, what needs to happen is that, if you're likening it to some of the Nordic countries, there need to be reserves, there needs to be a surplus. For me, the only way to have this surplus is if you are, number one, making money. If you have the food in the first place, you can't have extra of something you don't have, right? So I've always gone back to, if you're going to have, you need to make. It cannot continue to be donations. It cannot continue to be, relief food. If you're going to have extra, you have to make it, and you have to make it yourself. Shouldn't it be that Kenya has to get to a point whereby it is manufacturing and then it is selling for profit, and the profit is then what is going to be used to have a surplus which you then store? Are we going in that direction?
Absolutely.
Would you say yes or no?
Absolutely. And in my view, Kenya is latent. And you can look at even 5 sectors. Let's start with medical tourism. We've got the best medical facilities in the region. But how many medical tourists do we attract? If somebody wanted to come to Kenya today for a medical intervention, would they really have the guts to land at JKI? I'm not sure. So we haven't explored medical tourism. Let's talk about promoting Kenya as an education destination. We've got about 78 universities in Kenya. And you get students coming from Angola, from Tanzania, from Rwanda, Burundi. But we haven't really promoted it to the hilt to ask ourselves that if somebody's coming from Angola, what do they expect as a student? If they're coming from Cameroon, what do they expect? We have not exploited that. Our beaches in Mombasa and all over Kenya, we have not explored that. Even when you talk about aviation, and Muga, you'll be surprised to know that Kenya in the region has got the highest number of helicopters and planes. But if you want to service your plane today, you will take it to Uganda. Why? The tax levels in Kenya are extremely high. So it's prudent for you to have your chopper serviced in Uganda, then you bring it back. Now, we lost another opportunity to position Kenya as the logistic hub in the region. And Rwanda is eating our lunch. They've gone into a partnership with Qatar. So very soon it's going to be a big cargo center. So in my view, we are seated on our hands. We are in that latent space. We haven't explored our comparative advantages, our competitive advantages. And the reason why that cannot take place is because the people who are supposed to take those decisions, the politicians, do not have a peace of mind, or they are pursuing selfish interests. Now, if you wake up, in Kenya, the working week is 5 days. So right now, people don't work for 40% of the time. So it's only 60%. How are you going to ensure that you enjoy all these securities if you can't go to your place of work? If the energy which is supposed to go to these sectors, instead of our young men going to do farming, they're buying stones and they're going to be in the streets from around midday, how are we going to make progress? So in my view, the reason why that article was very critical, and I need to give myself a pat on the back because it's been read almost everywhere in Kenya, that we must align our politicians, they must align their selfish interest with our national interest and our public interest. If that doesn't happen, then we are going to be in trouble. Just when you do the scenario and sensitivity analysis, what would happen if Azimio decide we are going to have a Mandamano every day? Because it's very possible. Mr. Raila Odinga has got power and has got influence.
Mandamano every day.
And if he takes the decision that we are going to have a Mandamano every day, most prudent people will fear going to town. They'll stay at home. What happens to our economy? And then, as indicated, there are revenues which are supposed to be collected today. Even the county council, the Nairobi County, Sakaja the other day made a raised issues
about how much they are losing.
How much he loses,
I've listened to what you're saying. Much of what you've said, just like you've anchored it on the expectation of the Constitution, the expectation of the law, and everything else, it's basically you're restating the obvious. Okay? That we've got these three things that would guarantee our stability. That this is what makes Kenya a state and what it is. This is what is expected of leadership. Those are the obvious things. Now, is it your hypothesis here that our leaders have been missing any of these three? And if that's the case, then what are they missing? Are you saying that the previous administration, the leadership in the previous administration did not focus on politics, did not focus on economy, or did not focus on security, or focused on one of the three, or focused on none, or two of the three? What are you saying? What are you saying about this current administration?
During the first term of President Kibaki, he was able to maintain those three.
The first term?
The first term of President Kibaki.
2003 to 2007.
Yeah, he really worked hard to ensure that we have those three. Even the second term partially. And that is the time when Kenyans were very, very excited. And
really?
the reason why
really?
Yes.
Remember, halfway through the first term, there was a referendum.
Yeah, there was a shake-up.
And there was the birth of ODM.
ODM is.
And there was the birth of a very large government called the Government of National Unity that brought in Kina Nyachai, some people from KANU, and evicted some people from LDP who went to form. Was that we were talking about? President Kenyatta, Kibaki holding together those three?
Actually, using the example during the administration of the Grand National Government or Unity, in as much as you had a very bloated government, you actually had political stability. Because political stability is not just limited to the size of the cabinet, but whether or not people can wake up early in the morning and go on their business without any fear, without any phobia, without any conflict. And while it may look that it's the obvious, the purpose of advertising is to keep on reminding people that this is what needs to be done. But there's a tragedy that because our leaders, most of the time, they pursue their selfish interests, camouflaged as a national and public interest, people can easily get aligned to those interests, and they lose the plot, and it's a tragedy. And unfortunately, the majority of our Kenyan politicians, they use Kenya as a special purpose vehicle to achieve their selfish interests and objectives. So it's important to keep on reminding them every single day. Like, for instance, you have now the church leaders who went to see, the Catholic Church, the leaders, they went to see Mr. Raila Odinga yesterday. But they've been doing this in every administration apart from the first President Kenyatta's administration. Wherever there is a slight crisis, they keep on going. But have we bothered to look at what is the underlying solution? For instance, when you've got malaria, you can take all the Panadols in the world. But if you don't take, I think we used to use Malaria Queen or Metakelfin. If you don't take that one, then you're going to be in trouble. So in my view, we need to keep on reminding every single day. To the extent that now we have ambassadors and high commissioners issuing a statement saying that we recognize the election was free, fair, and credible. However, there are issues that you need to address. For how long are we going to sit back and wait for our partners and stakeholders to keep on reminding these things? While you've quoted Article 1, we, the people, have got the unique responsibility to remind them. In my view, that is the bottom line.
This discussion about the hunger, the selfish nature of politicians, this is a discussion which in this country is as old as time. The role of the citizenry, the purpose, the 2010 Constitution was purpose to align all these things that we keep discussing and to ensure that there is a legal foothold from which people can then function. Now, this government didn't create a drought. This government did not create the war in Ukraine. This government is actually not responsible for the yo-yoing of the oil prices on the global market. They are not responsible. Now, the government is led by politicians, as are the politicians in the opposition. What conversation does one hear as a citizen of this country from either those in government or for those who are in the opposition as to the exact thing that can be done to resolve and to alleviate the current problems that we have? Let me just give a live example. We've talked about building dams, 100 or so. We have in the past had water pans and creations that can store water. In the dry season, that would have been the best time for them to be dug up, removal of silt, dig them even deeper, create new ones. Was that done? The answer is a resounding no, it wasn't done. So now we have more rains and we know what to do with, and it's causing havoc. So a simple solution that existed was not adhered to. Politicians will do what they do. But for a country to move forward, an honest conversation about what needs to be done ought to be had. And that honest conversation clearly is not being led by politicians, because politicians have a conversation that resonates with the problems that citizens have, but that's what it does. It resonates the problems that citizens have. And the Kenyan trend and the Kenyan habit and the Kenyan culture of always looking for someone to blame for our problems also doesn't provide the solution. So, you as someone who analyzes these situations, what do you think is the possible solution to one, the immediate problem that we have right now, which is hunger and people who can't eat? Forget the fertilizer, forget the seeds, forget that. That will happen when it's supposed to happen. Now, today, as you analyze, is there a conversation in the political space that tells the citizenry of Kenya how the immediate problem of hunger is going to be solved?
In my view, it's all about demand and supply, and we are told that human beings, from economics, that we are rational, that as a human being you are rational, that you are supposed to vote with your selfish interest in mind. So the question you must keep on asking ourselves that when we go to cast our ballots, do we vote with our selfish interest in mind, or do we become victims? Or probably now we are suffering from the Stockholm syndrome, where we are falling in love with our captors, and they can beat us, and they can do whatever they want, and we still keep on clapping. Like, for instance, when you look at the reasons that Muga has indicated on why we are here today, there's the war in Russia, Ukraine, which has disrupted these global supply chain systems. And understand those two countries account for about 40% of our wheat production in Kenya. Can we really blame the Kenya Kwanza administration for that? We may not. Now, Mr. Raila Odinga said that part of the reason why he's calling for Mandamano is because of the high cost of living. Is that a genuine reason that it's because of the high cost of living that we're having these mandamanos, or is using the high cost of living to achieve his selfish political interest?
What do you think?
So we need to ask that question first, and then I'm going to answer it. Then the second question, as the Kenya Kwanza demonstrated capacity and competence to address the food inflation and to address fuel, or from the time they were sworn into office, they went to the Caribbean for holiday, they're missing in action, and Kenya is on autopilot. Now, if Kenyans can start...
Let's pause it on those two.
Yeah.
So it's either one of these two things.
Yeah.
Either the call for mass action is primarily because of the high cost of living, right? That is one. Number two is the government demonstrating capacity to address the high cost of living. So no.
Yes.
Those two.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
So, Dismas, you said yourself that from your own observation, the cost of living has gone up. The cost of food items and even said cost of energy has also gone up, right? One of the reasons that's being advanced here for Mandamano, and yes, it's debatable whether this is the primary reason for the leadership of Azimio, is the cost of living, or whether they're using that to ride on it, is the issue of the cost of living. Now, the question is, number one, do you think the people, citizens of Kenya, who are supporting Mandamano either by pouring onto the streets or by going onto the keyboards or by sitting back at home and saying, yes, to Mandamana, without going to Mandamana, are actually doing it because of cost of living? And number two, do you think the Kenya Kwanza administration has actually done things to give Kenyans confidence that it's addressing the current, not future, the current cost of living?
Yeah, when you look at all the revolution, the crisis, if you go back to Tunisia, it started from food and fuel. The young man was selling his wares outside, and then the local kanjo came and gave him a beating. Then he decided to take drastic action. It was around food and food and food. But we must ask ourselves that is this limited to Kenya? No, it's not limited to Kenya. In Egypt a few days ago, it was actually one of the leading stories in the Standard. People are requested to look for other innovative ways of having food security. Understand, even in the UK, you are limited on the number of produce you can actually buy. There are even the cost of energy has gone up on average 3 times, in other countries 4 times. So we're having that challenge, or a crisis is not subject to debate. Yeah, it's not subject to debate. But when Mr. Raila Odinga says that now it's because of this crisis that I'm calling for Mandamano, then we now must look at the hippo's nose and ask ourselves, is this really the reason? Because President Ruto has been in office for about 6 months. And 6 months is not sufficient time for anybody to take a decision to say that you've not been able to deliver. Even for CEOs in high-profile organizations, when you're given a job, you are given at least 1 year for people to see whether or not you can deliver. And then the second part of the question is that as Kenya Kwanza demonstrated capacity and competence to address this issue. And the answer is yes. They've come up with a supplementary budget. Then they've offered all these other incentives. So in my view...
Which other incentives are these?
I mean, especially for food, now people who are planting, they've been given fertilizer. There's some people who had said to well with farming.
So without the fertilizer, these farmers wouldn't plant?
A few would plant, but most would not plant.
In the years that people have been planting, have we had fertilizer subsidy?
We've been, there've been subsidies on consumption, but in the past the yield has significantly reduced, because if you got the same piece of land and then you keep on planting, you don't give it time, you don't give it a break, then you'll have a challenge. Where I come from,
are you suggesting that farmers don't understand this issue of crop rotation and understanding what needs to be done, and that is the trade they've been plying for generation upon generation?
Then you introduce another point about extension workers, and when you talk about the crop rotation, you are actually assuming that they've got unlimited acres of land that they can actually engage in this. We've got a land crisis, especially where I come from, that the land is so small, is limited, so you have to come up with these fertilizer. If you don't have fertilizer, your yield is going to be substantially compromised. And the best way to address that food security is to flood the market with food. So coming from the production side, and then giving people those fertilizer. The other day you hosted Governor Orengo, and he said that he was actually struggling giving people seeds, giving them fertilizers to do that. So there is evidence that there is movement towards ensuring that food insecurity in Kenya has been addressed. Well, a few days ago, I saw Linturi went to, I think, Zambia to try and engage in contract farming so that we can start getting maize
from Zambia.
Yeah. But again, the fundamental question is that for how long are we going...
That issue of going to Zambia is supposed to be a solution to our food problem.
I mean, an interim solution.
How is it?
Okay. It's also to say that the maize is already ready in Zambia.
No.
Oh, we still have to wait.
We've been given land.
Yeah, for contracts.
Why are we being given land and we have land?
Sorry.
I think here is the issue, though, Dismas. Yes, we cannot argue that the government has set aside money, has bought fertilizer, has been distributing fertilizer to farmers. No argument. It's happening. Quality and all notwithstanding, that's a whole debate altogether. The government has talked about our focus is going to be irrigation, and we are going to go big on supporting irrigation, building of dams, giving away 500,000 acres in Galana Kulalu, being given free land in Zambia. All those things, fine. However, those are future. Okay? And the question is, has the government given the people the confidence that they need to know that tomorrow I will be able to feed my family? In the interim, as we are waiting for the crop to germinate, to grow, to palilie, to vune, tukaushe, tupeleke kwa board, iende kwa mila, ikuja kama unga. And as we wait for all that to happen, the tomorrow, that's the question. Is there confidence, public confidence, that the government is aligned and attuned to the current need?
You're talking about short-term interventions,
yes,
and long-term interventions.
Yes.
Now, when you're talking about long-term, you're talking about the Galana Kulalu, you're talking about irrigating all the arid and semi-arid lands. That is long-term. Short-term,
medium-term.
Yeah, short-term is the food you're talking about that Linturi says is in the high seas. And for you to establish whether or not the government has given hope is to ask yourself that when you listen to President Ruto speaking, when you see these principal secretaries meeting under the chairmanship of Musalia Mudavadi, when you listen to Linturi speaking, are they actually going the extra mile to make sure that it address both the short term and long term? And that's the entire basis of when people are doing the MBA. Yeah, the short term and the long term.
Yes.
Now, depending on where you are seated.
In 6 months, how much maize has arrived in the country?
No, before even you go to 6 months.
Because Linturi has been doing the shuttle diplomacy such that even the deputy president can't find him to go to open the ASK show. He has to tell him, usiende kwanza twende ASK. In those 6 months, how much maize has arrived in the country to actually support the lowering of the cost of unga? In those 6 months, because the promise has been, we are going out there, we are importing, we are bringing. In those 6 months, how many people would you say are actually walking to a shop knowing, kuna mahindi ilikuja, knowing, not just knowing there is maize, there is unga, that's why I'm able to buy this thing at 130 or 190. Government has been talking about the price of unga has now come down to 190 and not the 230 that it was there before the handshake, blah, 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 blah. But is it because of what they've done?
No, the answer to your question depends on whether one wants to give a political answer or whether one wants to give an objective answer.
Let's deal with the objective.
Let's deal with objective.
Yeah, let's deal with objective first.
Objectivity of the matter is that people are looking for food today.
Yeah, and then all these issues, from my understanding of economics and all these interventions, they cannot be like instant coffee. It takes a while even for the short-term interventions to bear fruit. And one of the things you've seen them doing is coming up with, first of all, the supplementary budget to allocate resources, which in my view is a good thing. And those the area of subsidies that they're giving. But at the end of the day, if you want to give a political answer to this, you can easily go to the top of Mount Kenya and say that the Kenya Kwanza administration has done nothing. But again, another question you need to ask yourself is, how did we get here? And when you are very objective, how long does it take to turn around an economic situation?
Okay.
On average, it takes about 1 year.
Okay, I want to ask you, you've said this, I think the second time you said this now. So essentially what you're saying is that the government more or less needs a year. The president needs a year before we can now start to say, look, you failed here, you've not done your job. Okay, let's just say that out of the generosity of our hearts this morning, we're saying, all right, have a year. For these things that you've put in place, have a year for them to kind of turn around. That's great. Now, what we are saying now is that there also ought to be a plan. There needs to be something that needs to be done today. Can the people of Kenya who are hungry today not judge the government on the plan for today for a current problem? To say that in as much as you've put these long-term plans into place, there is a plan needed for which immediacy must be applied, because something needs to be done, because you have frustrated people who essentially the first item on the agenda is to feed themselves and their families, for which you also as a government have a responsibility to make the environment conducive enough for this thing to happen. You've talked about a supplementary budget, so maybe I can help a little bit. Would it be so difficult to have said the elements of that supplementary budget was to increase emergency funds, to see that let's put in an interim subsidy, for example, so that immediately food comes low? We've seen that money has been released for other things. For me, I would be seeing, okay, let's have the injection of emergency funds to bring down food so that this depressed state is alleviated at some point. Do things like that make sense?
Well, you know what they indicated? They said instead of offering those interventions or subsidies in consumption, they're going to the production side. They must be having their logic, and probably the government spokesman or one of the advisors would actually be able to break it down. But my view is that going to the streets today because of the high cost of living is a political decision. You are not addressing the actual reason for the high cost of living, because you cannot say that you've got a high cost of living and then you want to disrupt the economy 40% of the working week. That will not work. And then when you talk about those policy interventions, another question that you must ask yourself, are they moral-centric? Are they citizen-centric? Yeah. Because everything, I think, you know, the definition of leadership is that as, now for the case of President Ruto, identify our priorities and allocate financial resources to those priorities. That's what you're supposed to do. Now, he's created his supplementary budget, which is going to run in the interim. But in the next few days, now we'll see his full budget for one financial year.
So the
now,
supplementary
at that stage,
budget
is a band-aid. I would say
and
some
it's
sort of
allocated
a
money for
Band-Aid.
fertilizer.
For fertilizer, for
Okay.
seeds, and these are interim
seeds.
interventions. Yeah.
Okay. And especially the seeds, that is for the later rainfall, not this current one. So there's no need for allocating a supplementary budget for September. But let's assume that he has done that, okay? So that's for the short rains for Uko November. Currently, for the fertilizer, for the current fertilizer, that is still going to address food in June, July, going onwards. The issues that we're asking, current interventions, what are they? Remove Raila Odinga and Martha Karua and
All the politicians.
and all those guys from this conversation, all right? Is there a palpable reason that Kenyans would want to not throw stones, but talk to the government about the current need?
My opening remarks were
Because
around-
remove the Raila, because you can say, yeah, Raila is only riding on this. Why would Raila be riding on it? Because he has been able to read the pulse and seen these are the issues that are affecting Mora. And for me to actually be able to get my other agenda going, I'll use Mora's agenda as the cover.
Yes.
So you're accepting that Mora has an agenda, that Mora has an issue.
Mora's issue
And Mora's issue
right
is,
now.
today, I am not able, like you said, 100 bob is only giving me, cannot even buy me a packet of unga.
Mora's priority today, as we have this conversation, or rather concerned, is food inflation
Yes,
and the cost of fuel.
yes,
I hope we are agreed on that.
okay,
And the president has just been in office for only 6 months.
yes,
Now, the question we need to keep on asking ourselves from a very objective prism is that is 6 months sufficient to turn around this situation?
Is 6 months?
The answer is no.
No.
However, is 6 months sufficient for you to see that the administration has got capacity and competence to turn around this situation? Yes.
Yes.
Do they need more time? Maybe 1 year. I keep on talking about this 1 year, not the 100-day miracle. These are
1 year.
1 year. Because by then, we'll have a lot of seasons, a lot of crops. Now, within 1 year, if they've not sorted out this situation, then one may say, wait a minute, we gave you the mandate and you have not delivered. Now you can start asking
This much.
questions. But that does not mean
This much.
that Mora today shouldn't ask questions.
Bas.
Because
Now, as Mora is asking those questions, is Mora justified to ask whether 6 months are enough for the government, whichever is in place, to put in interventions to address her needs of today?
you see, when Mora is sleeping on an empty stomach, one of the things she needs is hope, and to be given indications that
Yes.
there's some proactivity,
Okay.
that people are moving in a
So
particular
why is
direction.
Mora agitated then? It's because, number one, that hope hasn't connected with her. Can we agree on that?
She's been given the hope,
But
somebody
it's not,
has come.
It's not somebody.
Yeah, no, somebody has come with heavy political influence who is telling them, forget about that hope. These guys have no capacity and competence to
So
deliver.
you're saying without Azimio, Mora would actually buy this hope. That don't worry about not being able to feed yourself tomorrow. Just wait until July.
Without having all these mandamanos and everything, everybody will stay focused on their co-economic activity and engage the factors of production
And
Because-
not agitate.
Yeah, and stay at home, tighten your belts, and work hard.
Let me ask a
so
basic
that in
question.
the next 1
Sorry,
year,
a really
the
basic
issues-
question. Sorry, Dismas. Before all this talk of this mass protests came about, did we not see a situation in the country that people were already complaining about the high cost of living? People were already complaining that life had become too expensive. Even before the rumblings of all of this came about, was there not already a depressed situation in the country?
It was an election item. You would even remember
Yep.
towards the election, there was a subsidy on unga,
Yep.
which again disappeared on a couple of days. So in fact, in my view,
So it's an issue.
It's an issue.
Of course, I started by saying food inflation and fuel is a fundamental issue,
And it's an emergency.
which has caused even governments to go down. You can talk about France, you can talk about Tunisia, but the elephant in the
Sudan.
room is But you can ask yourself one fundamental question: has this administration been given time to demonstrate capacity and competence to deliver? That is the bottom line.
Why
And
is that? Why is this the bottom line? Bwana Mokua? Why is this the bottom line?
Why is it the only bottom line?
Yes.
This
It's the bottom line.
Can't it be like a tiled bottom line?
No, because the architects of the Mandaman are saying these people have failed to deliver. Now, how can you deliver within 6 months?
Why can't
that
you?
becomes the question.
Why can't you deliver? Are you saying that in 6 months there are no deliverables? There's nothing you can do in 6 months?
Within 6 months, you're supposed to demonstrate that you have capacity and competence to do the actual delivery.
Is it
Because-
possible, Dismas, that that's exactly what the Kenyans are saying? That you are not demonstrating that you have the capacity?
No,
and
but
we demand that you demonstrate that capacity. Do you think there's a
No,
possibility?
there is no doubt in anybody's mind that they've demonstrated capacity and competence to deliver. However, because of the Stockholm syndrome, majority of people aligned in particular aspects have decided to ignore that.
Dismas, have you applied for that job?
Which one?
Government spokesman.
Was there a vacancy?
Yes.
Yes, a big one. So spokesman and 3 deputies.
Wow, I have no idea.
Dismas MOKUA, political risk analyst. Always a pleasure having you here.